Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The mysterious women of the Gunpowder Plot. Remember the 5th of November, Gunpowder Treason and Plot. I know of no reason why the Gunpowder Treason should ever be forgot. Every year, the people of Britain commemorate Guy Fawkes' infamous plan and scheme to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and along with it King James I, most of his royal family and government. The Gunpowder Plot ended with its discovery, with Guy Fawkes being arrested inside the walls of Parliament, along with a colossal amount of gunpowder. Many of the men involved were executed in brutal fashion, being hanged, drawn and quartered, and a number were killed in a shootout in the last stand by the plotters. But we know so much about the men of the Gunpowder Plot, but what about the women? What about the women of those men who schemed to develop history's most infamous plot? The men of the Gunpowder Plot were so driven through their religious convictions and Catholicism to bring about the death of James I and his government. They planned to change the monarchy to one more favourable to Catholics. The leader of the plan and the main instigator was Robert Catesby, and he was married to Catherine Lee. She grew up in a comfortable and influential home, and at the age of 21 married Catesby, and together they had 2 sons. Their marriage was a love match, and Catherine was not interested as much in religion. She was not a rebel, neither was she an activist, and she was not a Catholic zealot either. But Catherine died around 1599, and it's believed that following her death, that Catesby then began to become more embittered, and that he took more of an active role in politics and his faith at the time. By the time in which he began the Gunpowder Plot, he was a widower, and it's possible that he felt he had nothing to lose because of this. Another influential plotter was Thomas Percy, and he was married to Martha Wright, the sister of John and Christopher Wright, 2 men who had been involved in Robert Devereux's revolt. The 2 were also at school with Guy Fawkes, and the Wrights were respectable within society and were well connected. It was Thomas Percy who hired the basement where the gunpowder was stored and where Guy Fawkes was discovered, and he would ride to Holbeach House with Catesby after its discovery, but little is known about Martha after the death of her husband, or how involved she was in the plot. Anne Tufton was married to the cousin of Robert Catesby, Francis Tresham, who died inside the Tower of London after his arrest. Anne was the daughter of Sir John Tufton, and she married Tresham in 1593, and they had 3 children together. There are few records of Anne, however her father was the Sheriff of Kent and was a knight. He was very rich and even paid for a church to be rebuilt after it was destroyed by a lightning strike. The Tuftons were not known to be Catholics, so it's unlikely that Anne knew of her husband's involvement in the Gunpowder Plot. Tresham himself was not the most reliable of people, and he had a number of issues with the law, including assault. He was a latecomer to the plot, and it was possible that it was he who blew the whole plot, and Catesby did not really trust him. Anne saw her husband being arrested after being implicated, but was spared the shame of seeing her husband being publicly executed, as he died inside of the tower. Anne's reaction to the plot isn't known, but she was a Protestant, and because of this was safe from the law. Even if she was a secret Catholic, she would have gone under the radar, but her husband's death must have plagued her. The most prominent gunpowder plotter that's remembered today is Guy Fawkes, the expert in explosives caught red-handed at the scene of the crime. However, despite this, there are sources that say that he was married as a son, but there aren't any records that confirm this. Fawkes was later tortured using the rack at the Tower of London, and his brutal punishment forced him to reveal the names of his co-conspirators. He was hanged, drawn and quartered in Old Palace Yard in Westminster, and alongside him was Thomas Wintour, who also died with him, but there are no records also that he had a wife. Married to Thomas's brother Robert, another plotter was Gertrude Talbot, who belonged to the famous Talbot family, who were the Earls of Shrewsbury. The family even hosted Mary Queen of Scots during her time in prison in England. Gertrude was married to Robert Wintour, and they had 3 children, and the family were well-known Catholics. Along with Robert Catesby, the Wintours were at the heart of the treasonous plot, and it's likely that Gertrude was aware of her husband's involvement. It could be believed that she also quietly supported too, and allowed the plotters to meet at their home. However, her husband was executed for his involvement on the 30th of January 1606 inside of St Paul's churchyard. Another woman linked to the Wintours was Dorothy Wintour, the sister of the 2 Wintour brothers. She was married to a fellow plotter, John Grant, and he owned a house not too far from Stratford, which was considered a stronghold for the plotters and a safe house. John and Dorothy had a son, but it's believed that she must have known what was happening with the plot, with so many of her male family members being involved. There was another Dorothy, who was married to John Wright, and he was one of the first members to join the plot, and it's believed the pair had a daughter, but little is known about her life. John Wright died in the standoff at Holbeach House alongside other conspirators. Margaret Ward was married to Christopher Wright, who also died in the standoff. Her husband was a known rescuant who refused to attend the new church services and was held under the suspicion of conspiracy and treason during Elizabeth I's reign. He was also imprisoned following Robert Devereux's rebellion, and they were close to Catesby at the centre of the plot. Another man involved in the plot was Ambrose Rookwood, who was also executed alongside Guy Fawkes. He was from a powerful Catholic family and was married to Elizabeth Tyrwhitt. Following the death of his father, Rookwood inherited his father's estates, and his wife Elizabeth made their house Coldham Hall, a common refuge for Catholic priests who could hide out there too. Rookwood was involved in horses too, and it was probably him who provided the horses for the men to escape London. It's likely that his wife, Elizabeth, was in on the plot and aware of it, as she was close to underground Catholic worship, which could have been very costly for her. Robert Keyes was married to Christina Groom, who was a widow and was a governess. Robert was the first cousin of the wife of Ambrose Rookwood, and this provided him with good Catholic connections, and he was brought into the plot late and was tasked with looking after gunpowder stored at Thomas Percy's house. We don't really know if Christina was involved in any capacity. Thomas Bates's wife was Martha, whose surname is unknown, but Bates's was a servant at Catesby's who was arrested after he fled Holbeach House before the last stand. Everard Digby was another plotter who was involved, and he suffered after the plot fell through. He was married to Mary Molshaw, and their marriage was a happy one, and they lived in other lavish houses. Digby's first cousin, Anne Vaux, was a sympathiser to Catholicism and was even related to Catesby, and he met Catesby and was persuaded to join the plot. Sir Everard Digby wrote letters whilst inside the Tower of London and stated his devotion to Catholicism, and what is interesting is what happened to his wife when the plot was discovered. Mary was at the family home of the Throckmorton family, with the priest Henry Garnet, who was also involved. If she was here, then it's likely that Anne Vaux was also there as a known priest hider and rescuant, and possibly other wives of the plotters could have been there at Cofton Court. This house may have been used to shelter the families of the plotters, as the gunpowder attack would have been carried out and the planned uprising would have occurred. Mary escaped any punishment and was allowed to keep the family home. The gunpowder plot was the failed plot which would have changed the face of English history forever. If the explosion would have occurred, no one within 100 metres of the blast would have survived, and all of the stained glass in Westminster Abbey would have shattered. The shootout, with authorities after, claimed the lives of Catesby and Percy, but many of the conspirators were hanged, drawn and quartered, and this included Guy Fawkes. He was executed in front of the very building that he planned to blow up, but Fawkes had the last laugh. He jumped from the gallows and managed to break his neck, and somehow escaped the gruesome fate that he would have had, being dead before the executioner got his hands on him. There is little known about some of the women involved in the Gunpowder Plot, but it's clear that many of them must have been involved and must have had inside knowledge of the plan to kill the king and his family and government. These women will have given over their homes for meetings and for the conspirators to meet and talk, and it's likely that within their close circles they knew what was happening. But today the women of the Gunpowder Plot remain stories that are not as well known. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.